Rugby Championship this weekend, folks. All Blacks taking on the Pumas from Wellington. All Blacks getting a bit of a test of their depth at lock with Scotty Barrett, the captain, being out. Argentina also without their captain Montoya, who is out injured. So it's Savea and Matera who will captain both of these sides. We will go through the squads which have been named. You know, I got some stats for you, some recent history predictions, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how this one is going to go. Wellington, not the happiest hunting ground for the ABs in kind of recent years. Our record there is certainly not as good as some other grounds, but they'll be looking to not continue that trend up against the Pumas. I think the last time the All Blacks and the Pumas played at Wellington was way back in 2012, and I think only two guys who are named in this squad played in that game, and that was Augustine Creevy and Barrett, who both came off the benches for their respective sides. Creevy is still on the bench for this one. His career has kind of gone full circle since then. And Bodie, well, he's getting a start in this one ahead of Will Jordan, who's also back. We'll get to the All Black squad now. De Groot, Taylor, and Lomax. I think that is the kind of premier front row for the All Blacks at this point. So Tyrell Lomax is back in a tight head. De Groot back up from the bench, and Taylor also back into 23. Remembering they changed the side a fair bit around for that matchup against the Fijians over in America. Tupou Vaa'i and Sam Darius, certainly not the most common locking duo you're used to seeing in black. For so many years, it was white lock and metallic. Then Barrett was on the scene. Tuipulotu's also been there, but none of those guys are here. White lock and metallic have obviously called times in their All Blacks careers. Paddy Tuipulotu's injured, and Scott Barrett, the captain, also injured with that kind of finger surgery. So Sam Darry, who's had a cracking Super Rugby campaign, who got his test debut against the Fijians, gets a first test start, so big congratulations to him. They'll be looking to kind of help secure some line-out ball. Ethan Blackadder and Dalton Papali'i at 6 and 7 is certainly a hard tackling 6 and 7 combo. And if you're looking for run meters and busts and whatnot from the loose forwards, you would imagine the bulk of that is going to come from Ardie Savea, who captains the side at number 8. But yeah, there's a lot of tackling in our flanks there, and they'll be trying to put on some pressure at the breakdown too. TJ Perenara, who's leaving New Zealand Rugby at the end of the season, is named at 9. He's had a somewhat kind of miraculous comeback from injury, which is really pleasing for him. And D-Mac continues to get the nod at 10. He's getting absolute faith shown in him by Razor. And I think some time in the saddle is definitely going to do him good as he kind of builds week in, week out. The midfield is also an interesting one because Rieko Ioane, who's had a lock on that 13 jumper for the All Blacks, has been dropped to the bench for this one. Razor basically said he didn't want to go into too much details about why, but that Rieko needs to back his skill set. Now for mine, Rieko's got a good running game because he's quick, and he's got a pretty solid defensive game as a centre, which he's been building over the years. But he still doesn't pass it that much. And if there's one aspect of his skill set which you maybe like to see him use a bit more, it is that passing game. So for mine, that's probably the messaging he's getting. That's me trying to put 2 and 2 together. Whether I'm on the right mark or not, who knows. So it's Geordie and ALB in the midfield, which I quite like that midfield. Geordie's a big unit. He can carry the ball, maybe not quite as devastating as some of the other World's 12s, but he is a big guy and he can bust tackles, he can kick. And ALB, his ability to switch between 12 and 13 to bring other guys into the game, to beat tacklers, he is kind of the quintessential New Zealand midfielder. So I'm happy to see him get a crack at 13 personally because I think it's good reward for the form. The wings of Talea and Reese means there's no spot for Caleb Clark in this one. He's kind of been hard done by, but as Razor said, all the wingers are in pretty good form. And then Bodie, pulling the strings at 15, retains that spot ahead of Will Jordan, who is back, who's had one kind of preseason game for Tasman to prove his fitness, but he is on the bench. So as Razor said, it's a lot of speed on that bench with Ratima, Ioane, and Will Jordan in the backs. Forward replacements are Safa Amua, Ofatuanga Fassi, and Fletcher Newell. I look forward to seeing how Newell goes at scrum time when he comes on. Josh Lord, not seen a lot of him this year, but as the locking crisis kind of continues with all the injuries, he's played in All Blacks colours before, so he's called upon here. And then Wallace Satiti gets the nod as the kind of loose forward replacement after getting a crack against Fiji as well. So that is the All Blacks. I think Rieko's drop to the bench is probably the biggest kind of change, but it was kind of forecast in some areas, so not kind of wholly surprising. And then Will Jordan, I mean, that's pretty good news to have him back at fullback or wherever he comes on the wing, because he is he is just proper X factor. I mean, Tupolotu, Barrett, Perofeta, Jacobson, all these guys are injured, so not considered for this side. And I guess for Samapeni Finau, it's also a little bit of a nod that maybe his kind of early performances didn't meet the standards that the All Blacks would have liked to see. For the Pumas, remembering they played against France and Uruguay in their July test, they went 1-1 against France, where they played one game really poorly and one game really well. And they absolutely put Uruguay to the sword. And this is a side which has come to New Zealand and won before, only a couple of years ago. And a lot of those guys who played in that game are playing in this game. So there's going to be that extra bit of belief in this side. Although they did get a lot of the points from Emiliano Boffelli in that game, who kicked a lot of penalties, but he's injured, so he is not touring. He is certainly a big loss for the Pumas. Gajo, Ruiz, and Bejo, that is the front row. They scrummed and just bossed things really well in the second game against France. But the first game was concerning. So it's a little bit of a flip of a coin as to how things are going to go. And Ruiz is relatively inexperienced at hooker. It's usually been Montoya and Crevi. Crevi is there on the bench. He didn't play in July, but he is back into the squad. But Montoya being injured means they're a little bit light in terms of experience in the starting hooker. But I'm pleased for Ruiz getting the nod ahead of like the 38, 39-year-old Crevi, because Ruiz certainly needs more game time. Molina and Rubiolo is also a pretty unfamiliar lock-in duo. If you didn't watch the July tests, you may be asking yourself, who are these guys? Because it's usually the likes of Lavanini, it's usually the likes of Guido Petti, sometimes Crema can step into the second row, sometimes it's Alemano, but Molina, he got his 3 caps in those 3 July tests, and he really looked the business, really athletic looking second rower, and then Rubiolo is kind of a bit more of the big unit guy. Matera, Crema, and Juan Martin Gonzalez is right up there in terms of back rows. I mean, New Zealand fans know all about Matera from his time with the Crusaders. Crema is a massive unit, really physical presence, and then Juan Martin Gonzalez is certainly the skills guy. I'm pretty sure he's the one who scored the try in that victory over the All Blacks a couple of years ago. Bertrano and Carreras get the nod at 9 and 10. Remember, Carreras is kind of that outside back who plays 10. He's maybe more like the kind of young Bowden Barrett style in terms of just able to bring that running game into that first receiver role. He gets the nod ahead of Albanoz, who played against Uruguay, who's more of a kind of genuine playmaking 10. But Carreras maybe have to do the goal kicking with this one with no Boffelli. Midfield-wise, it is Chocobares and Sinti, so 2 of their European guys from the Premiership and from the top 14. Sinti hasn't played under Contepomi just yet, but it's his first crack at the 13 jumper, and Chocobares switches from 13 to 12. And then the wings is an interesting one because they've gone with Moroni, who's more of a midfielder, the veteran, like 82 caps in his 30s. Not the quickest guy anymore, but certainly a veteran. Him guarding Mark Talea is going to be an interesting call. And then on the other wing, it is Mateo Carreras, who is more the kind of out-and-out paceman, steps, winger, and then Juan Cruz Malia, another guy who hasn't played under Contepomi just yet because he was busy with top 14 duties, comes in at fullback, and he is vice-captain. Crevi, Vivas, and Sclavi, those are your front row replacements. Sclavi also playing his rugby over in La Rochelle, so he's certainly one to come on and do some scrummaging if needs be. He's a big unit. Lavanini, likewise, the big kind of experienced second rower, is only on the bench for this one, his first game under Contepomi. They've got a debutant at Ephraim Ilias, uncapped, but under 20s captain, so certainly one for the future, and I believe plays lock mostly, so they've essentially got kind of 2 locks on the bench. Oviedo is the loose forward replacement, which only leaves spots for 2 backs, which is Bazan Balez, the halfback, and Albanoz, who's pretty much a specialist 10. So you're probably looking at the likes of a Santiago Carreras to shift out from number 10, potentially to the outside backs, if Albanoz comes on. But then remember, Moroni is also playing on the wing. He can certainly play in the midfield. Sinti can play on the outside backs if needs be. Malia can play in the midfield if needs be. So they've got plenty of guys who are versatile enough to move around if they need to. Stats, I love a stat. New Zealand, from the few games we have seen thus far, have the highest rate of knock-ons of the 4 Rugby Championship teams. So they'll be certainly looking to reduce the error count, but to be fair, Argentina are not a lot much better. Argentina was second worst. So maybe that's a little bit of kind of early season embedding in with both sides having new coaches. But yes, both sides would like to reduce the number of unforced errors. New Zealand also kicked a lot, especially against England. A little bit less against Fiji, but they kicked kind of 30 plus times a game. So although New Zealand, gets this, they're well known for their running game, they've certainly got a kicking game to kind of back that up as well. And the discipline has actually been pretty good. Like if you look at, when the Pumas have usually beaten the All Blacks, it's been with a lot of three-pointers accumulating. Remember, Nico Sanchez, in that first ever victory over the All Blacks, just kicked penalties for days. It was Boffelli last time. So the fact that the All Blacks have been able to keep their penalty count below 10 in each of their games thus far is encouraging. And they haven't conceded any points, not just penalties, any points thus far under Razor in the final 20 minutes. So a very, very encouraging way that they are able to close out games. Argentina have been conceding a fair few points at the start of their second half. So whatever they are doing at halftime, it ain't working that well. They conceded 10 points against France in that first test, which they lost. They conceded 15 in the second and even 5 against Uruguay. So if the All Blacks can identify some weaknesses in the Argentinians at halftime, they may be looking to exploit. But their line-out is operating the best of the Rugby Championship teams. It's at 96% in the July test. Like we saw quite a few sides in July have issues. Like Ireland had issues. The All Blacks at times had issues. But the Pumas line-out, even in the game where they played poorly, the first game against France, the line-out still operated really, really well. Recent history between the sides is 4-1 from the last 5 to New Zealand, with that victory down in Christchurch being the kind of one exception there. That was 25-18 to the Pumas. Remember, the follow-up game a week later in Hamilton was an absolute walloping, 53-3. So there's a few lopsided scorelines here with the All Blacks tending to put on some points. World Cup, it was 44-6. Rugby Championship last year was 41-12. And then if we're looking back to that game played in Brisbane back in 2021, it was 36-13. So the All Blacks have put on some points over the Pumas in recent times. The average score is 38-12. So it tends to be pretty comfortable. Remember, Wellington, not the All Blacks' kind of strongest ground in recent times. And even that Wellington game, which they played back in 2012, was only 21-5. So that's not close, but it's a bit closer than like 44-6, for example. Bookies are saying the All Blacks by 17 points. The Rugby Forecast algorithm is going a step further, saying the All Blacks by 26 points. It is on at Wellington. Aussie Angus Gardner is the ref. 7:05 kickoff. So pretty standard. I believe that's 4 or something in the morning for you guys in Argentina. So potentially an early wake-up call for you guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, folks. I would much appreciate it. If you love a stat, love a preview, love a lineup, you guys let us know your thoughts. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.